The morning of January 27, 1944, over the skies of central Italy, Captain Mario Bellagambi pushed his Macchi C.205 Veltro into a shallow dive, scanning the horizon for the American bomber formation. His ground controllers had vetoed him toward the air at 22.0. 0FT was thin and cold, seeping through the gaps in his leather flight suit, despite the cockpit's enclosed canopy. Below him stretched the snow-dusted Apennines, their ridges casting long shadows in the winter sun. His engine, the German-built Daimler-Benz DB605, purred smoothly at cruise power, its 12 cylinders producing 1,175 horsepower that drove the three-bladed propeller with mechanical precision. Bellagambi was confident. He had every reason to be. The Veltro Italian for Greyhound was the finest fighter the RIAA Aeronautica had ever produced. In 6 months of combat operations, he had personally witnessed what this aircraft could do against American fighters. He had outturned P-40 Warhawks over Anzio, forcing them into defensive scissors maneuvers that ended with the Americans diving away toward the coast. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. He had climbed away from P-38 Lightnings that couldn't match his rate of climb above 18.0 ft. He had engaged British Spitfire Mark V's in turning fights, where the Veltro's lighter wing, loading, and excellent control harmony gave him the advantage. His squadron mates reported similar experiences. The Macchi was fast, climbing well, and maneuverable. It was everything Italian pilots had needed after years of flying underpowered, inadequately armed fighters against increasingly capable Allied aircraft. Then Bellagambi saw them, not the bombers he expected, but a formation of fighters he didn't immediately recognize. They were flying high, perhaps at 25.0 ft, moving in loose pairs with the tactical discipline that marked experienced pilots. The silhouette was unfamiliar sleek, with a distinctive belly scoop and a bubble canopy that suggested excellent visibility. These weren't P-42s with their blunt noses and inline coolant radiators. They weren't twin-boomed P-38 seconds, and they weren't the elliptical, winged Spitfires he knew well. He keyed his radio transmitter, reporting the contact to his wingman and to ground control. The response crackled back through his headset. Unidentified type. Proceed with caution. Do not engage unless fired upon. But Bellagambi's tactical instinct told him something his commanders on the ground couldn't know. These fighters, whatever they were positioned perfectly to escort bombers that would arrive within minutes. If he allowed them to maintain their altitude advantage, his squadron would be fighting uphill. When the real work began, he made his decision. He would climb to investigate, maintaining enough separation to avoid combat, but close enough to assess the threat. His hand moved forward on the throttle, pushing it through the gate to war emergency power. The DB605 responded immediately, its supercharger whining as boost pressure climbed. The Veltro accelerated, its nose rising as Bellagambi traded speed for altitude. The climb rate was good, nearly 3.0 ft per minute at this weight and altitude. The American fighters were still above him, perhaps 3.0 ft higher now, but he was closing the gap. They seemed to be maintaining their patrol pattern, unaware or unconcerned with his approach. Bellagambi felt the familiar pre-combat tension that heightened awareness where every sense became acute. He checked his fuel gauge adequate for 20 more minutes of combat maneuvering. He confirmed his armament was armed 212, 7mm Brada Safite machine guns in the nose and two 20mm Mauser MG 151 cannons in the wings, 150 rounds per cannon, enough for perhaps 8 seconds of sustained fire. He was ready for whatever these Americans could throw at him. He had no idea that within the next 3 minutes Everything he believed about air combat superiority was about to be proven. Catastrophically wrong. The Macchi C.205 Veltro was not an accident of design. It was the culmination of a specific evolutionary path in Italian fighter development that began in the late 1930s, when the Riaia Aeronautica recognized its aircraft were falling behind international standards. The preceding Macchi design, the C.200 Sietta, had proven adequate in the early war years with its robust construction and excellent handling characteristics. But it was underpowered, mounting only an Italian, yes, ein Fiat, a 74 radial engine producing 870 horsepower. Against British Hurricanes and American P-42s arriving in North Africa, the Sietta's modest performance became a liability. Italian engineers understood the problem. The nation's indigenous engine industry could not produce power plants comparable to the British Rolls-Royce Merlin or the American Allison V1 710. Italy's industrial capacity, strained by years of conflict in Ethiopia, Spain, and now across the Mediterranean, lacked the metallurgical expertise, precision manufacturing capability, and research funding that Allied nations could marshal. The solution was pragmatic licensable German engines, specifically the Daimler-Benz DB605, a 12-cylinder inverted V-liquid cooled engine that powered the Messerschmitt Bf-19G, Germany's frontline fighter. Aeronautica Macchi I received authorization in 1941 to develop a new fighter around this engine. Chief designer Mario Bellagambi, who had created the elegant lines of the C.200 and its successor, the C.202 Folgore, understood that simply bolting a more powerful engine onto an existing airframe would create problems. The DB605 produced nearly 50% more power than the previous DB601 used in the C.202. That additional power meant more torque, more weight on the nose, and more cooling requirements. Bellagambi's team lengthened the fuselage slightly to accommodate the larger engine and its accessories. They redesigned the cowling to optimize air flow through the radiators, one ventral radiator for coolant, and two smaller wing-root radiators for oil. They strengthened the airframe to handle the increased stresses, and critically, they upgraded the armament where the C.202 had carried two inadequate 12.7 mm machine guns. The C.205 would mount two 12.7 mm BDA-SAF HAT machine guns in the nose with 300 rounds per gun synchronized to fire through the propeller arc, plus two 20 mm Mauser MG 151 over 20 cannons in the wing with 150 rounds per gun. The first prototype flew on April 19, 1942. Test pilots reported exceptional handling qualities. The Veltro was responsive, stable at high speeds, and capable of sustained high-G maneuvers without structural failure. Maximum speed reached 399 mph at 23,600 ft, competitive with the best Allied fighters then in service. Rate of climb was 30 ft per minute at sea level, decreasing to about 20 ft per minute at 20 ft. Service ceiling was 37 ft, though combat effectiveness dropped considerably above 30 ft, where engine power fell off and control surfaces became mushy in the thin air. Production began slowly. Italian factories operating under Allied bombing and chronic material shortages could not produce aircraft at the rates German or American plants achieved. By September 1943, when Italy signed the armistice with the Allies, only 66 C.205 seconds had been delivered to operational squadrons. After the armistice, production continued in German-occupied northern Italy, but total production never exceeded approximately 262 aircraft through the end of the war. This scarcity meant that most Riaia Aeronautica and later Aeronautica National Repubblicana squadrons continued flying older, less capable aircraft. The C.205 equipped only elite units with experienced pilots who could maximize its potential. Those pilots who did fly the Veltro loved it. Lieutenant Franco Lucchini, an ace with 26 confirmed victories, called it the best Italian fighter of the war. Superior in many respects to Allied types we encountered. Captain Luigi Guarini, who would finish the war with 19 victories, including 14 four-engine bombers, reported that the C.205 could match or exceed the performance of Spitfire Mark V's and American P-40 seconds in virtually every category except perhaps maximum speed at very low altitudes, where the Allison engine in the P-40 produced its best power. The confidence Italian pilots felt in their Macchis was grounded in actual combat experience, not propaganda or wishful thinking. Throughout late 1942 and into 1943, C.205 units racked up impressive victory claims, defending Italian airspace and supporting operations in North Africa and Sicily. On June 11, 1943, over Pantelleria, C.205 seconds of the 1st Fighter Group engaged American P-40 Warhawks, escorting B-17 bombers. The Macchis destroyed 3 P-42s without loss, their superior high-altitude performance allowing them to dictate engagement terms. On July 5, 1943, during the Allied invasion of Sicily, C.205 seconds engaged P-38 Lightnings in a swirling dogfight over Augusta. The Lightnings, flying at medium altitude, where their twin Allison engines produced excellent power, found themselves surprised by the Macchi's climbing ability and turning performance. 2 P-38 seconds went down, their pilots bailing out over the Mediterranean. The Italian pilots landed, reported their victories, and flew again that afternoon. These successes reinforced Italian tactical doctrine, which emphasized individual pilot skill, aircraft maneuverability, and aggressive engagement at close range. Italian fighter pilots were trained to dogfight to enter turning engagements where superior handling could overcome raw performance. The C.205's light wing loading of 31 lb per square foot and its harmonious controls made it an excellent dogfighter. At speeds below 300 mph, the Veltro could outturn most Allied fighters, particularly the heavier P-38 and P-47 Thunderbolt. Italian doctrine also emphasized altitude advantage when possible, diving attacks when altitude permitted, and disengagement by diving when outmatched. But fundamentally, Italian pilots expected to fight in visual range in maneuvering combat, where pilot skill mattered more than sheer speed or climb rate. This doctrine worked against the aircraft they encountered in 1942 and early 1943. It would prove inadequate against what was coming. What Italian pilots did not fully appreciate in early 1944 was how rapidly American aircraft design had progressed. P-42s and early P-38 seconds they had fought were first-generation American fighters designed in the late 1930s and rushed into production when war broke out. These aircraft were adequate but not exceptional. They represented what American industry could produce quickly, not what American engineers could design given time and resources. By 1944, a new generation of American fighters was arriving in the Mediterranean theater. The P-47 Thunderbolt, massive and heavily armed, could dive faster than anything in the sky and deliver devastating firepower from its 850 caliber machine guns. The P-38 Lightning had evolved through multiple variants, each addressing shortcomings revealed in combat. And then there was the North American P-51 Mustang, an aircraft that would fundamentally change air combat over Europe and the Mediterranean. Italian intelligence reports noted the arrival of these new types, but assessments varied. Some analysts correctly identified the P-51 as a serious threat, noting its reported performance specifications suggested it matched or exceeded the best Axis fighters. Others dismissed it as propaganda, arguing that no single-engine fighter could achieve the combination of speed, range, altitude performance, and firepower the Americans claimed. After all, physics imposed limits. An aircraft optimized for speed usually sacrificed maneuverability. High altitude optimized for speed usually sacrificed maneuverability. High altitude performance came at the cost of low altitude capability. Long range meant carrying more fuel, which increased weight and reduced performance. The P-51, according to Italian calculations, should have compromised somewhere. It didn't, and that impossible combination of capabilities would become devastatingly clear to pilots like Captain Mario Bellagambi within moments of their first encounter. The North American P-51 Mustang existed because of a failure and a deadline. In April 1940, the British Purchasing Commission approached North American Aviation with a contract to build Curtiss P-40 Warhawks under license for the Royal Air Force. Britain needed fighters desperately. The Battle of France was weeks away from catastrophic collapse, and the impending Battle of Britain would demand every aircraft the RAF could muster. North American Aviation's President James Dutch Kindleberger made a counter-proposal. His company could design and build a completely new fighter superior to the P-40 in the same time frame it would take to establish P-40 production. The British were skeptical but intrigued. They gave North American 120 days to produce a prototype. Chief designer Edgar Schmud and his team began work immediately drawing on wind tunnel data from earlier projects and incorporating lessons learned from early air combat reports filtering back from Europe. They designed the aircraft around the American Allison 5.1 710 engine, the same power plant used in the P-40, but with a critical difference in airframe philosophy. Where the P-40 had been designed for ruggedness and ease of production, the Mustang would be designed for aerodynamic efficiency. Schmud's team created a lamina flow wing, a revolutionary design where the airfoil shape maintained smooth airflow over a greater percentage of the wing surface, reducing drag significantly. They positioned the radiator in a ventral scoop beneath the fuselage using the Meredith effect, where heated air exiting the radiator actually provided a small amount of thrust partially offsetting the cooling system's drag. They designed a low-drag fuselage with minimal frontal area and smooth contours. Every square inch of the aircraft was optimized for speed. The prototype, designated NA-73X, flew on October 26, 1940. It was faster than the P-40, faster than the Hurricane, faster than early Spitfire variants, but it had a critical flaw. The Allison V1710 engine, while powerful at low altitudes, lost performance dramatically above 15,000 ft because it lacked an effective high-altitude supercharger. At 20,000 ft and above, where German fighters operated and where bombers needed escort, the early Mustang was mediocre. The Royal Air Force accepted the aircraft anyway, designating it the Mustang Mark I, and deployed it in tactical reconnaissance and ground attack roles, where its low-altitude speed and range proved valuable. American Army Air Forces also ordered the type, designating it the P-51A, but similarly restricted it to low-altitude missions. For 2 years, the Mustang remained a capable but not exceptional fighter, its potential limited by its power plant. The transformation came in 1942 when Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker flew a Mustang Mark I and immediately recognized that the airframe's aerodynamic efficiency would be perfectly matched to the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, same power plant that made the Spitfire formidable at high altitude. The Merlin's Stage 2 speed supercharger maintained power output at altitudes where the Allison faded. Rolls-Royce installed a Merlin 61 in a Mustang airframe, creating what would be designated the Mustang Mark X for RAF service. The results were extraordinary. Maximum speed increased from 390 mph with the Allison to 441 mph at 24,800 ft. With the Merlin, service ceiling increased from 31,350 ft to 41,900 ft. Rate of climb improved from 2,200 ft per minute to 3,475 ft per minute. The Mustang had been good. With the Merlin, it became exceptional. North American Aviation received contracts to produce the Merlin-powered variant using the Packard V1650, a licensable version of the Merlin manufactured in the United States. The P-51B entered production in 1943 at North American's Inglewood, California plant, while the identical P-51C rolled off the line at the company's new Dallas, Texas facility. By December 1943, P-51Bs were arriving in England to equip 8th Air Force fighter groups. By January 1944, they were arriving in Italy to equip 15th Air Force units. The specifications were impressive on paper: empty weight 6, 840 lb, loaded weight 9, 200 lb, maximum takeoff weight with external fuel tanks 12, 100 lb. Wingspan 37 ft0 and 1/2 in, length 32 t3 in, height 13 t8 in, wing area 233 ft, power plant 1 Packard V16005, 103 Merlin. A 12-cylinder liquid-cooled engine producing 1,490 horsepower at 24 zeros, 0 ft with war emergency power. Armament consisted of 4 Browning M2 150 caliber machine guns, 2 in each wing with 350 rounds per gun for the inboard guns and 280 rounds per gun for the outboard guns. Total ammunition load 260 rounds, rate of fire approximately 800 rounds per minute per gun, giving roughly 20 seconds of sustained fire time. Maximum speed 441 mph at 24,800 ft. Cruise speed 362 mph, stall speed 100 mph, service ceiling 41,900 ft. Combat range with internal fuel approximately 750 mi with 2 108 gal drop tanks 300 mi, but specifications on paper meant nothing to pilots who had never encountered the aircraft in combat. Italian pilots reading intelligence reports saw numbers that seemed impossible. No fighter could be that fast, climb that well, and fly that far on internal fuel while carrying that much armament. The numbers had to be propaganda, American exaggeration designed to intimidate Axis pilots. Real combat would reveal the truth. Captain Mario Bellagambi continued his climb toward the unknown American fighters, his Macchi C.205 Veltro responding crisply to control inputs as he gained altitude. At 24,000 ft, he leveled off, maintaining enough speed to maneuver if the Americans turned aggressive. His wingman, Lieutenant Alindro Ruffini, held position 300 m to his left and slightly behind, the standard Italian tactical formation that allowed mutual support while maintaining enough separation to avoid collision during violent maneuvering. The American formation was now clearly visible against the pale blue winter sky. Bellagambi counted 8 aircraft in 4 pairs, flying in a loose-finger 4 pattern that suggested they had adopted German tactical doctrine rather than the rigid V formations American fighters had used earlier in the war. This was his first indicator that these pilots were experienced, probably veterans of the air battles over Germany, where survival demanded tactical flexibility. The aircraft themselves were beautiful in a functional sense, sleek, purposeful, with none of the angular brutality of the P-38 or the blunt robustness of the P-40. The bubble canopy suggested excellent visibility, a significant advantage in air combat, where most kills came from unseen attackers. The ventral scoop was distinctive, positioned after of the wings in a location Bellagambi recognized would create minimal interference with air flow over the fuselage. Whoever had designed this aircraft understood aerodynamics. Bellagambi's tactical mind processed options. He was slightly below the Americans, perhaps 500 100 ft lower now that they had noticed his approach and gained some altitude. His fuel state was adequate. 15 minutes of combat maneuvering remained before he would need to consider breaking off. His armament was fully loaded. His engine temperatures were normal. Coolant and oil both in the green arc on his gauges. He was ready. The Americans turned toward him, not aggressively, not diving to attack, but a gentle turn that positioned their noses in his general direction while maintaining altitude. This was curious. Most American fighters, when they spotted Axis aircraft below them, immediately dove to attack, using their altitude advantage to build speed and energy. These pilots were doing something different. They were maintaining their altitude, content to watch and wait. Bellagambi by Kita's radio. Raffini, maintain your position. I am going to make a high-speed pass to assess their reaction. Do not engage unless they attack. His wingman acknowledged. Bellagambi pushed his throttle forward, feeling the DB-605 respond with a surge of power. He pulled the nose up slightly, trading some speed for altitude, climbing toward the American formation at a shallow angle. His indicated airspeed was 320 mph, fast enough to disengage if necessary, slow enough to maneuver if they turned to fight. The Americans maintained their position, neither advancing nor retreating. Bellagambi closed the range to 1000 m, then 800, then 600. At 500 m, he executed a climbing roll, a maneuver designed to display his aircraft's agility while simultaneously checking his 600 position for threats. The Veltro responded beautifully, rolling crisply around its longitudinal axis while maintaining its climb. When he rolled wings level, he was perhaps 300 m from the nearest American fighter, close enough to see details. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The American pilot sat behind that distinctive bubble canopy, his head turning to track Bellagambi's Macchi. The fighter's nose art was visible, a name painted in script letters below the cockpit, though Bellagambi couldn't read the English words at this distance. The aircraft wore olive drab paint on upper surfaces with neutral gray below standard American camouflage. The national insignia, white star on blue disc with white bars, was clearly visible on fuselage and wings. Then the American did something Bellagambi didn't expect. He rocked his wings in a gesture that was universally understood among fighter pilots. Acknowledgement, possibly even a salute between professionals. For a moment there was no war, no nations, no ideology, just two men in powerful machines, acknowledging each other's presence in the sky. Bellagambi rocked his wings in response. Then he turned away, diving slightly to build speed, planning to circle back to his wingman's position and continue the patrol. The American followed, not aggressively, not diving to attack, but simply following Bellagambi's turn with a lazy, almost casual pursuit curve. Bellagambi completed his turn, rolled wings level, and looked back over his shoulder. The American was still there, perhaps 600 m behind, matching his heading. Bellagambi pushed his throttle to the stop, commanding maximum continuous power. The DB-605 responded. Propeller pitch automatically adjusting to maintain optimal revolutions per minute. His airspeed increased 340 mph. 360. He checked over his shoulder again. The American was still there, same distance, seemingly unconcerned with Bellagambi's acceleration. This made no sense. Bellagambi was flying at near maximum speed for the Veltro at this altitude. The American should be falling behind unless he was also at maximum power, which seemed wasteful for what was essentially a tail chase with no immediate threat. Bellagambi decided to test the Americ's capabilities more directly. He pulled the nose up sharply, executing a chandelle, a climbing turn that combined altitude gain with a direction change. A maneuver that demonstrated both engine power and pilot skill. The Veltro responded perfectly, climbing through 500 ft while turning 90 degrees, bleeding speed as it converted kinetic energy to potential energy. At the top of the chandelier rolled level, expecting to find the American far behind, struggling to match the climb. The American was there, not falling behind, not struggling, but positioned exactly where a competent pilot would be slightly high and to the side, maintaining energy while keeping Bellagambi in sight. The American matched his chandel, possibly even exceeded his climb rate, and done so while maintaining tactical position. For the first time, Bellagambi felt a touch of concern. This was not normal. This was not the performance he expected from any American fighter he had encountered. He keyed his radio again. "Raffini, these aircraft are not P-42 or P-38 seconds. Unknown performance characteristics. Recommend we disengage and report." But even as he spoke, part of him rejected the idea of running from a single American who had made no hostile move. He was an Italian fighter pilot, flying the best aircraft his nation could produce. He would not retreat without understanding what he faced. He would soon wish he had. Bellagambi made his decision. He would force the American into a turning fight where the Veltro's superior maneuverability would give him the advantage. He pulled the stick hard into his lap and right, initiating a maximum performance turn at full power. The G-forces pressed him into his piddock seat, 3GS4, the Veltro's controls remaining responsive even at the edge of its performance envelope. He rolled through 180 degrees, then rolled level, expecting to find the American overshooting or struggling to match his turn rate. The American was gone, not behind him where he expected, but ahead, somehow having gained position during the maneuver. This was impossible. Bellagambi's tactical sense screamed warning. He had just executed a near-perfect defensive turn, a maneuver that should have denied any attacker a firing solution. Instead, the American had somehow used the same moment to gain advantage. Then Bellagambi understood. The American hadn't tried to match his turn. The American had simply pulled up, using his superior power-to-weight ratio and energy state to climb above, while Bellagambi's turn bled speed and energy. It was a fundamental principle of energy tactics. Don't follow your opponent into his best regime. Instead, use your advantages to force him into yours. The American pilot understood this perfectly. Bellagambi pushed his throttle through the gate into war emergency power. The DB-605 responding with maximum boost pressure from its supercharger. He needed to regain altitude and energy before the American could capitalize on his position. His airspeed had dropped to 240 MPH during the turn, dangerously slow if the American decided to attack. He pointed the nose down slightly, trading altitude for speed, building his energy state back to something manageable. The American remained above, not attacking, seemingly content to maintain position. Bellagambi climbed again, less aggressively this time, building speed while gaining altitude. 300 mph, 320, 340. His altitude was back to 24.0 ft, same as before the engagement began. The American was at 26.0 ft, 20 ft above, positioned perfectly for a diving attack. Bellagambi made a critical decision. He would show this American what the Veltro could do in a pure speedrun. He rolled level, pointed the nose at the horizon, and pushed the throttle hard against the stop, confirming war emergency power. The DB-605 screamed, producing 175 horsepower at this altitude, driving the propeller at 2,800 revolutions per minute. The Veltro accelerated 360 mph, 380-390. At 395 mph indicated air speed, The Veltro was approaching its maximum velocity at this altitude. Bellagambi was flying as fast as his aircraft could fly in level flight at 24,000 ft. He held this speed, watching his fuel gauge drop as the DB605 consumed fuel at war emergency power settings. He could maintain this for perhaps 5 minutes before he would need to reduce power to avoid engine damage from overheating. He checked his mirrors, simple glass reflectors mounted above his canopy that gave him a limited view of his 600 position. The American was there, perhaps 1 kilometer behind, still following. Bellagambi felt a surge of satisfaction. At this speed, the American could not close the distance. Whatever this new fighter was, it apparently could not exceed the Veltro's maximum speed. They were evenly matched. Then the American accelerated, not slowly, not gradually, but with a purposeful surge that closed the range from 1 kilometer to 800 m, then to 600 m. Bellagambi's satisfaction evaporated, replaced by shock. He was flying at maximum continuous speed. The American was overtaking him. This was not possible. Every fighter had a maximum speed determined by engine power, drag, and aerodynamic design. The Veltro was at its maximum. The American should be at his maximum. They should be holding the same distance. Bellagambi pushed harder on the throttle, though it was already at the stop. There was no more power to give. The American continued closing 500 m, 400, 300. Bellagambi could see him clearly now. That bubble canopy and the predatory lines of the nose with its 450 caliber machine guns, 2 in each wing, their muzzles dark circles that seemed to be watching him. The American was not just faster. He was significantly faster, perhaps 40 or 50 MPH faster at this altitude. Mathematics and physics became horrifyingly clear. If the American could fly 50 MPH faster in level flight, he could dictate every engagement. He could chase down any Italian fighter attempting to disengage. He could maintain pursuit indefinitely. And if he could do this in level flight, his diving speed would be even more impressive. There would be no escape, no tactical option that didn't depend on the American pilot's choice to let him go. Bellagambi broke hard left, desperate to force an ear, overshoot, to create separation, to do anything that might deny the American this perfect pursuit position. The Veltro responded instantly, rolling into a 7G turn that grayed Bellagambi's vision at the edges. He held the turn, bleeding speed rapidly as the turn radius tightened. 280 mph, 260, 240. He rolled level, looking for the American. The American was exactly where any competent pilot would be offset to the side, maintaining energy, watching Bellagambi struggle. And then, almost casually, the American turned away, climbing back toward his formation, which had maintained altitude throughout this entire encounter. The message was clear: we can beat you anytime we choose. Today, we're letting you go. Bellagambi rejoined his wingman. Both pilots turning for home without a word over the radio. The fuel gauge showed 7 minutes until they would reach the bingo point, minimum fuel to return to base with reserves. They flew in silence, each man processing what they had witnessed. Below them, the Italian countryside passed. Villages and roads and farms that had been Italian since before Rome was empire. Land that generations had defended, a land that now seemed suddenly vulnerable because the aircraft defending it were inadequate. When Bellagambi landed and shut down his engine, he sat in the cockpit for a long moment before climbing out. His ground crew approached, reading his expression. "Captain, what happened? Did you engage?" Bellagambi removed his flying helmet, feeling the cold air against his sweat-damp hair. "We encountered the American's new fighter. It is faster than anything we have, significantly faster, and it climbs better. And it has the range to escort bombers all the way to Germany if they choose. His crew chief, a veteran mechanic who had maintained fighters since Ethiopia, looked stricken. "What can we do?" Bellagambi walked away from his aircraft toward the operations tent, where he would file his report. He didn't answer the question because there was no answer. What could they do? They could fly and fight with what they had, knowing it was inadequate, hoping that skill and courage could compensate for material inferiority. They could do their duty, but they could not change the mathematics of engine power, aerodynamic efficiency, and industrial capacity. In his report, Bellagambi wrote, "Encountered 8 unknown type American fighters believed to be new P-51 Mustang variant. Aircraft demonstrated speed in excess of 440 mph at 24,000 ft, significantly exceeding Macchi C.205 maximum velocity, climb rate and acceleration superior to C.205 in all regimes tested. Armament appeared to be 450 caliber machine guns wing-mounted. Pilot demonstrated excellent tactical awareness and energy management. Assessment: this aircraft type represents serious threat to all Italian fighter operations. Recommend immediate tactical doctrine." Review: the report went up the chain of command. One more piece of bad news in a war that was producing nothing but bad news. Italian fighters were obsolete. Italian pilots had known this since Sicily, since the Americans arrived with their overwhelming numbers and their casual abundance of fuel and ammunition. But knowing it in general terms and experiencing it personally were different things. Bellagambi had just learned that even his beloved Veltro, the finest fighter Italy had produced, was outmatched by American engineering and industry. The revelation would spread through Italian fighter squadrons as other pilots encountered the P-51 and returned with similar reports. The war was lost. They had always been going to lose, but now they knew it with absolute certainty. Word of the P-51 Mustang's capabilities spread through Italian fighter squadrons with the speed of bad news in wartime. Pilots who had encountered the new American fighter shared their experiences in ready rooms and dispersal areas. Their descriptions met with skepticism by those who had not yet faced the threat themselves. But skepticism dissolved quickly as more encounters occurred throughout February and March of 1944. Every pilot who tangled with the Mustang returned with the same assessment. It was faster, climbed better, turned adequately despite its speed advantage, and possessed range to escort bombers anywhere over Italian or German airspace. The psychological impact was devastating. Italian fighter pilots had endured 2 years of progressive defeat, watching their nation's fortunes decline. From the optimistic offensives of 1942 to the desperate defensive battles of 1944, they had adapted to fighting outnumbered, learning to maximize their aircraft strengths while avoiding American numerical superiority. They had accepted fuel shortages, ammunition shortages, replacement aircraft shortages, and the constant attrition of experienced pilots lost faster than training could replace them, but they had retained belief in one core principle. In single combat between equally skilled pilots, their Macchi C.205 could compete with Allied fighters. The P-51 shattered that belief. There was no tactical doctrine, no amount of skill, no advantageous positioning that could overcome a 50 mph speed differential, combined with superior climb rate and comparable maneuverability. Italian pilots found themselves in situations that had no solution. If they engaged, the Americans could dictate terms. If they disengaged, the Americans could pursue. If they stayed high, the Mustangs could climb to meet them. If they stayed low, the Mustangs could dive and maintain the speed advantage. Captain Mario Bellagambi flew 11 more combat missions after his first encounter with the P-51. He engaged American fighters 3 more times, always attempting to use altitude and surprise to negate the Mustang's performance advantages. On March 14, 1944, while intercepting a formation of B-24 Liberators bombing the marshalling yards at Verona, his flight of 4 Macchi C.5 seconds was bounced by 6 P-51Bs from the 31st Fighter Group. The Americans dove from 28,000 ft, building speed to over 450 mph before opening fire. Bellagambi saw them coming, The warning came from his wingmen, who had better position to scan the sun sector, but seeing them and evading them were different problems. He broke hard right, pulling maximum G, his vision tunneling as blood drained from his head. The P-51 seconds split their formation, 2 following his break, 4 engaging the rest of his flight. Bellagambi's defensive turn bought him seconds, but the Americans didn't try to match his turn radius. They climbed, maintained their energy, and waited for him to straighten out or run out of air speed. When Bellagambi rolled level at 230 mph, dangerously slow and vulnerable, the P-51 seconds were positioned perfectly above and behind him. He saw them. The P-51 seconds were positioned perfectly above and behind him. He saw the muzzle flashes 450 caliber machine guns firing in sequence, their rounds creating a cone of fire that walked toward his aircraft. He pushed the nose down desperately, trading his remaining altitude for speed, diving toward the ground where perhaps the terrain would limit the Americans' maneuvering options. The P-51 seconds followed, easily matching his dive, their streamlined fuselaires, and efficient cooling systems allowing them to maintain structural integrity at speeds that would have torn apart earlier American fighters. Bellagambi pulled out of the dive at 8000 ft, his airspeed reading 410 mph. Faster than he had ever flown the Veltro, his aircraft shuddered with the stress, control surfaces vibrating. He leveled off, scanning frantically for the Americans. They were gone, not behind him. Not above him, simply gone. Bellagambi circled cautiously, checking his 600 repeatedly, expecting the attack that never came. After 2 minutes, an eternity in air combat, he spotted the P-51 seconds climbing back toward the bomber stream, resuming their escort duties. They had broken off the pursuit, not because they couldn't maintain it, but because escorting the bombers was more important than confirming the kill on a single Italian fighter. Bellagambi returned to base alone. His 3 wingmen were missing. 1 had been shot down and killed, his Macchi disintegrating under sustained 50 caliber fire. 1 had bailed out successfully and would return to the squadron 3 days later after evading German troops in the area. 1 had been forced to crash land with engine damage from a single burst that had penetrated his cooling system. Of 4 aircraft that had engaged, 3 were lost for a mission that accomplished nothing. The bombers had hit their target. P-51 seconds had defended them successfully. Italian fighters had been swept aside, as if they were barely relevant to the outcome. This pattern repeated across Italian airspace throughout spring 1944. The Aeronautica Nazionale Repubblicana, the Air Force of Mussolini's Italian Social Republic in German-occupied northern Italy, lost experienced pilots at an unsustainable rate. Training programs could not replace combat veterans quickly enough. Fuel allocations decreased monthly as Allied bombing destroyed refineries and interdiction missions cut transportation routes. Replacement aircraft arrived irregularly, often diverted to Germany, where the Luftwaffe faced its own existential crisis, defending the Reich against American daylight bombing and British night raids. Italian fighter pilots increasingly found themselves relegated to secondary missions, attacking Allied ground forces. When fighter escort was minimal, defending against night bombers where the Mustang's speed mattered less, flying reconnaissance missions where avoiding combat was the objective. The offensive missions that had characterized Italian fighter operations in 1942 and early 1943 became memories. By summer 1944, simply surviving a mission was considered success. Captain Bellagambi flew his last combat mission on July 23, 1944. The mission tasking was defensive patrol over Milan, protecting industrial facilities from American fighter-bomber attacks. He encountered no American aircraft during the patrol. His Macchi C.205, lovingly maintained by a ground crew working with increasingly scarce spare parts, performed flawlessly. When he landed and shut down his engine for what would be the final time, his logbook recorded 418 combat flying hours over 2 years of war. He survived the war, unlike many of his contemporaries. The Italian Social Republic collapsed in April 1945. Mussolini was captured and executed by partisans on April 28. German forces in Italy surrendered on May 2nd. Bellagambi surrendered to Allied forces on May 3rd, turned over his aircraft, and was processed through a prisoner of war camp before being released in June 1945, when the paperwork confirmed he had committed no war crimes. The story of Italian pilots encountering the P-51 Mustang was not merely about individual aircraft performance or pilot skill. It was a manifestation of industrial capacity disparity that determined the war's outcome long before any particular battle was fought. The numbers revealed a gap so vast that no amount of courage or tactical innovation could bridge it. These numbers represented not just production statistics, but fundamentally different approaches to modern warfare. North American aviation's production of P-51 Mustangs reached industrial scales that Italian aircraft manufacturers could not comprehend. The Inglewood, California plant employed over 40,000 workers by 1944, operating 3 shifts around the clock, 7 days per week. Assembly line system, refined through years of automobile manufacturing experience, was applied to aircraft production with devastating efficiency. Components arrived at the plant from hundreds of subcontractors, engines from Packard in Detroit, propellers from Hamilton Standard in Connecticut, instruments from dozens of specialized manufacturers, all arriving according to precise schedules that minimized inventory storage while maximizing assembly line flow. At peak production in 1944, North American Aviation's 2 plants produced over 500 P-51 seconds per month. That was 500 aircraft. In 30 days, more than 16 aircraft per day counting all shifts. By contrast, all Italian aircraft manufacturers combined Macchi, Fiat, Rian. Caproni produced approximately 262 Macchi C.205 seconds total throughout the entire war from 1942 to 1945. The United States built more P-51 seconds in 2 weeks than Italy built C.205 seconds in 3 years. The total production numbers were even more lopsided. North American Aviation produced 786 P-51 seconds of all variants by war's end. This included 956 P-51D and P-51K variants with the bubble canopy and 650 caliber machine guns, making it the most produced variant. It included 988 P-51Bs and 186 P-51Cs, the variants Italian pilots first encountered in early 1944. The factories continued production after Germany surrendered, building aircraft for the planned invasion of Japan that never occurred because atomic bombs ended the Pacific War in August 1945. But raw production numbers only partially explained American dominance. P-51's operational characteristics reflected design philosophy differences that went beyond any single aircraft. American fighters were designed for range, recognizing that strategic bombing campaigns required escorts capable of accompanying bombers deep into enemy territory. The P-51B carried 184 gallons of internal fuel in fuselage and wing tanks, with 2 external drop tanks of 108 G. Each total fuel capacity reached 400 G. This gave the Mustang combat radius exceeding 650 mi, meaning it could escort bombers over 300 mi round trip. The Macchi C.205 carried 350 L of internal fuel, approximately 92 gallons. Combat radius was approximately 240 mi. The C.205 could defend Italian airspace, but it could not escort Italian bombers to distant targets, even if Italy had possessed strategic bombers to escort, which it did not. Italian aircraft design philosophy emphasized point defense and tactical support roles appropriate for Italy's strategic position in 1930s, but inadequate for the global industrial warfare of the 1940s. Maintenance requirements revealed further disparities. P-51 Mustangs were designed for maintainability. Engine changes could be accomplished by trained crews in approximately 4 hours using standard tools and equipment. The entire engine was mounted on 4 points and could be removed as a complete unit. Replacement engines arrived from Packard in protective containers already equipped with accessories and ready for installation. Squadron maintenance personnel could perform most repairs without returning aircraft. Depot-level facilities, Captain Bellagambi understood this intellectually by war's end, though the emotional acceptance took longer. In interviews conducted in the 1960s, when Italian military historians were documenting their nation's wartime experience, Bellagambi spoke about his encounter with the P-51 with remarkable clarity and no bitterness. "We were fighting a nation that had 10 times our industrial capacity, perhaps 20 times. They could lose 10 aircraft and build 15 to replace them. We could lose 10 aircraft and might receive 5 replacements, if any, arrived at all. They could train pilots thoroughly because they had fuel and time and aircraft for training. We sent boys into combat with minimal training because we had no choice." He continued, "The P-51 was an excellent aircraft, certainly better than our C.205 in most respects, but that wasn't really the point. If Italy had possessed P-51 seconds and America had flown Macchis, America still would have won because they had thousands of aircraft and we had dozens. They had fuel to fly training missions and combat missions and ferry missions. We rationed fuel so carefully that some days we couldn't fly at all. The aircraft type mattered, but the numbers mattered more." This was the lesson that Italian fighter pilots learned in the winter and spring of 1944, watching American fighter formations escort bomber streams that darkened the sky, seeing P-51 Mustangs that could fly faster and farther than Italian fighters could match. Industrial warfare between modern nations was not decided by valor or skill or tactical innovation. Though all of those mattered in individual engagements, it was decided by industrial capacity, resource allocation, and the ability to sustain operations over years of grinding attrition. The Italian pilots who called the P-51 slow based on their experience with earlier American fighters were not fools. They were experienced combat pilots making reasonable assessments based on available information. When they discovered the P-51 could chase their Macchis at 440 MPH while their own aircraft topped out at 395, they learned the same lesson that German tank crews learned facing American production numbers, that Japanese naval officers learned watching replacement. Carriers arrive faster than American shipyards could be bombed. That every Axis serviceman eventually learned. Industrial capacity determined outcomes, and the Allies possessed industrial capacity that Axis nations could not match or counter. The war ended. The P-51 Mustang flew on in American service, fighting in Korea, serving in Air National Guard units into the 1950s, becoming a beloved war bird cherished by collectors and aviation enthusiasts. The Macchi C.205 Veltro disappeared into history. A footnote in aviation books, a might-have-been aircraft that was technically competent, but produced in numbers too small to matter. And the pilots who flew both aircraft, American and Italian, grew old, remembering the days when they were young, and the sky was their battlefield, and the outcome of nations hung on whether they could fly faster, climb higher, and shoot straighter than the man in the other cockpit. But the real story was never about individual men or machines. It was about systems, industrial systems, training systems, logistic systems that either sustained or failed to sustain modern military operations. The Italian pilots who encountered the P-51 learned this lesson personally, immediately, in a way that no briefing or intelligence report could convey. They learned it in the moment when they pushed their throttles to the stop, flew as fast as their aircraft could fly, and watched American fighters overtake them effortlessly. They learned it when they returned to base and filed reports that said, "We cannot compete with this. Our aircraft are inadequate. We need better equipment." And they learned it again when those reports went up the chain of command. And nothing changed because nothing could change, because Italy simply lacked the industrial capacity to produce better equipment in meaningful numbers. That was the cost of truth, not death in combat, though many died, Not defeat in battle, though battles were lost. The cost was understanding truly, understanding that courage and skill meant nothing against overwhelming material superiority, that they had been sent to fight with inadequate equipment against an enemy who could absorb losses and return stronger, and that the war's outcome had been determined long before they ever encountered that sleek American fighter climbing effortlessly past their best altitude performance. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now.